experts who cover the State House: Joe Hallett, senior editor at the Columbus Dispatch; Mark Niquette, veteran political reporter at the Dispatch; and Karen Kasler, bureau chief for Ohio Public Radio and Television, offer their insights into campaign 2010. Joe, let me ask you right out of the gate here. John Kasich offers this substantial policy proposal. It's all about jobs. He wants to eliminate the Department of Development and put it in the hands of a not-for-profit corporation. Where did this come from, and where does it go?
Well, we were just grateful finally to get some beef in this campaign, and it is a substantial proposal that came right out of his philosophical mind, because he is ideologically predisposed to less government, smaller taxes, and to the extent that he can get rid or downsize departments, skinny down government, as he often says, he will accomplish his goals. There are a lot of questions, though, about whether this proposal actually will work, because it is fraught with potential constitutional problems and quid pro quo problems. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how this is. It'll be well vetted during the campaign, and we'll see if voters like it.
Kind of interesting timing. This is an agency that's been in the news in the last couple of weeks. The appliance rebate program. Turns out the Department of Development, without knowing, or without the director not knowing, and certainly the governor not knowing, they actually outsourced a contract to Texas, which then outsourced jobs in El Salvador. And John Kasich actually mentioned that part of it in this press conference earlier in the week.
To El Salvador is just a perfect example of the right hand not knowing what the left hand's doing. I mean, there's no coordination between the departments. It's just become a tangled mess.
So, Mark, I guess this plays into what we've been talking about in this campaign, which is basically Kasich, anti-government, anti-incumbent, this type of mode, and taking a swipe at a government agency.
Right, and I think it sounds very good. I mean, the rhetoric is appealing. You have business people in charge of decisions, not bureaucrats, and it fits into a lot of what Kasich's been saying on the campaign trail. And I think we're going to hear more about privatization. That we can do a lot of these government services provided in the private sector. But there are a lot of questions, I think, about the specifics of how is this going to work, as Joe said. Starting with, we're going to have a private entity funded in large part, at least it seems, with public dollars, and how does that work? And what are the logistics of how this development function would be operated in a private setting as opposed to a public sector?
Yeah, and I think the idea that this appointed panel that would serve at the pleasure of the governor, with the governor in charge, would also be able to accept money from labor unions, from corporations, from nonprofits. How is all this going to mix together, and who is eventually going to benefit from this? The goal obviously being that the state benefits, but the questions of who benefits in the meantime and whether it's even constitutional for this to happen are very serious. This is not the first time that the idea of getting rid of the Department of Development has been heard. There have been a lot of critics over the years who have suggested this, but certainly, and very conservative critics who have suggested this, but certainly this is the first time I think that a candidate has said, let's get rid of this entire state agency that is charged with economic development at a time when we really need economic development.
What surprised me is that there was no price tag attached to this. We're facing a potential $8 billion budget hole next year. Seemingly, when you had this press conference, Joe, you would have said, by the way, eliminating a state agency will save us 300, 400, whatever number million of dollars that we can put toward that looming budget problem. Do they not know?
Well, they probably don't know exactly. One of the things they want to do is strip away the roughly half, about 200 employees of the Department of Development that are not actually involved in jobs program. They run weatherization programs and other things. So, and then they would make the remaining Development Department employees private sector employees, rather overseen by basically a private sector board of CEOs appointed by Kasich. I think he's got to be careful, because it's easy to pick on a big department like development, but actually, if you talk to a lot of business leaders around the state, they think it's been pretty effective. They're happy with the way the state conducts trade missions, and they're especially happy with the Third Frontier program. Kasich says we need to get it out of the hands of all these university professors and put it in the hands of entrepreneurs. And again, that all sounds good, but this program is very well liked by business leaders across the state.
I've talked to some business leaders as well who've said that we would not have the opportunities that we have if it hadn't been for the Department of Development seeking out opportunities, finding ways to connect business leaders and companies. So yeah, I've heard that as well.
And what's going to be interesting with this proposal is I don't think the idea is we're going to make development go away. We're still going to be doing economic development activities, but the question is, are we just going to be doing the same thing we've been doing in a private setting as opposed to a public setting the way we have now, or how much of a change are we going to see in the loans and abatements and grants and everything that development does now to keep and attract jobs?
Karen, speaking of universities, it turns out John Kasich was making $4,000 per lecture over at The Ohio State University. Governor Strickland was irritated with both the university and John Kasich. How does that play out?
Well, it's a $50,000 a year salary that Kasich was making as a guest lecturer, where he could come in once to 4 times a month. And so it averaged out to about $4,000 per visit. And it wasn't public money. It was paid for with an endowment fund. But still, I think what Strickland was talking about was that it sends a bad message that if you're going to talk about government doing more and being more responsible with money, and then you have this on the side. And there were other guest lecturers who haven't accepted these kind of monies and have come in and done these same kinds of things. So I think that's where Strickland was getting a little irritated with Kasich. And then, of course, Kasich fired back saying, well, his campaign said, you know, if Ohio State didn't like what I was doing, well, they wouldn't have hired me so many times. So you did have that kind of pushback a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Let me, the House Minority Leader Bill Batchelder earlier in the week held a press conference. We'll hear from him in just a second. But he held a press conference to suggest that the governor had flip-flopped on the issue of NAFTA. But during that press conference, he also mentioned that John Kasich's proposal to eventually eliminate the income tax here in the state would probably not work. Here's a clip from House Minority Leader Bill Batchelder.
And very frankly, I think that it's very clear that with the economy where it is now, that kind of a change cannot be made.
All right, so we have the minority leader, perhaps the next speaker, if the Republicans take control of the House, saying that the income tax elimination plan is dead. Is that going to get traction as we get into these debates and get into the fall?
Well, I think, you know, John Kasich built his campaign on that idea at least a year and a half, 2 years ago. But I think everybody realized he was going to hit a little bit of a wall if indeed it got to if he got elected in the House, even if the House got into Republican hands. The idea of the elimination of 40% of the state's revenue was going to be a hard sell at this economic time. And so, you know, you've seen John Kasich talking a little bit less and less and less about this plan and scaling back on it. And yeah, I think this is the first time, though, that a lawmaker has said, yeah, we're not going to do...
A Republican lawmaker.
Yes, yeah, we're not going to do that right now, you know, and putting the quash on that for at least the immediate future.
Well, I don't think it's inconsistent necessarily with what Kasich has said, too. I mean, what he's sort of talked about is, you know, as we reduce government spending, as the revenues are there, you know, we'll reduce the income tax over time. But like a lot of things in this campaign, you know, there's been no other meat to that. I mean, we haven't heard anything about, well, how long would it take then? Or, you know, what time of process would you go through to, you know, reduce spending? And what would you reduce to get to the point where you could cut the income tax?
And we should say there was that initial idea of eliminating it. And then after that, when we got into campaign mode earlier this year, that's when the, well, you know, not right away, we need to take more time.
Well,
but there was the initial plan, which seemed to be pretty urgent.
It was in the beginning when he was first starting his campaign. He talked about it the day that he announced that he was running for governor. And yeah, as things changed, his plan changed, which happens in both campaigns. And so it's interesting to watch each campaign say, well, this has changed for me. This is why we're changing this proposal. But the other campaign calling that a flip-flop.
Mm-hmm. It's still a Kasich goal, but finally a nod to reality by one of the conservative leaders of the state that you can't eliminate the income tax in Ohio, because if you do, you will have kids kicked to the curb. You will have schools closing all over the place. That income tax is absolutely crucial to the services and to the citizens of this state.
Yeah, keeping track. Welcome back to Capitol Square. A couple polls that we want to take a look at in the governor's race as we continue our discussion on Campaign 2010 on Capitol Square this week. This one from Reuters, 48-39, Kasich in the lead. And then we've got the latest Rasmussen, which has a 10-point lead, a 10-point spread, 52-42. We're still before Labor Day, so I imagine there's not a lot of credence in the polls, but the point of putting those up is that, again, if the campaigns are fighting for that 20% that's truly fluid, not the base, but what's fluid, if there is a sense that independents and undecided voters are just upset with incumbents. Wherever they're at, whatever their party, they just are angry. That could be the tip of an indication that that tsunami's coming, that anti-incumbent tsunami's coming.
And indeed, a lot of very learned political observers like Charlie Cook in D.C. are beginning to predict this Republican wave, and there's actually a feel to it right now. But we will see. As you know, President Obama was in town trying to combat that and talk about his agenda and give it some time. But there is a feel out there that voters are in the mood for change. Whether they want the change Republicans will bring is very questionable.
With memories of just 2 years ago of why they voted Republicans out. As you mentioned, Joe, the president was in town Wednesday in Columbus. Actually, here's a little sound from him. The president basically saying, look, I know the economy is not improving as quickly as we'd like.
As we continue over the next several months and next several years, we're going to see a Columbus and an Ohio and a United States of America that is going to be stronger than it was before this crisis struck. I am absolutely confident of that, but we got more work to do.
You know, this isn't rocket science. Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980 in a wave election. By 82, independents were not happy with the direction, the fact that the economy was not recovering very quickly. 1992, Clinton is elected in a bad economy. Things are not moving or improving quickly enough in 94. This is, as I said, this is not rocket science. I mean, there's an indication that independents in particular, the undecided, truly in the middle, are angry with incumbents and the lack of things that are happening. That would probably not play well for Democrats in this election cycle.
Well, and the president's walking a fine line, and you can kind of even hear it in that kind of clip where he wants to be able to take credit for the things he's done, like the federal stimulus, the healthcare overhaul, the financial banking overhaul. But on the other hand, he knows the conditions on the ground aren't great. You know, Ohio still has 10.5% unemployment. People are still struggling. So, you know, he has to sort of temper that with, well, it's not happening as fast as we'd like, but we're in the right direction. But I think that's why you're seeing, you know, more of a pivot to the idea that, you know, we don't want to go back to the way we were before. The policies that sort of got us in the ditch in the first place is sort of the rhetoric.
Well, and I think the Tea Party, while you can argue that it's scattered and it's got all these different things that it's worried about and whether it has the strength that it had before or whether it's gaining or not, I think you do have a lot of people that have that attitude of, what is going on with spending, what is going on with taxes, where is that there's no certainty, that there's a real wave of uncertainty and it's affecting the markets, it's affecting hiring. I think you have a lot of people that are in that 20% who are saying, I don't know who to believe and I don't know who to trust here, who's going to make a change that's going to put us back on a road where it's stable, where I'm not going to worry about my taxes, I'm not going to worry about losing my job. And that there's a real wave of that confusion in there, I think.
You know, a lot was being made before this presidential visit about the two-way street for Strickland and Obama. Obviously, Obama comes in to help him raise money, and it doesn't hurt the governor to be seen with Obama, especially to energize the Democratic base. And in turn, then the thought is that in 2012, with a Democratic governor in the governor's office, it'll help Obama's re-election. And there's no doubt it will be some help. But I think that's overblown a little bit, particularly when you think of it in this context. In 2012, this governor, if it is Strickland, or even if it's Kasich, is going to be tremendously unpopular because he's got to fill an $8 billion budget hole. And the way he is going to have to fill that is with tax increases, steep cuts in programs that people
like education.
Right. Or a combination of both. That is a recipe for being very unpopular. And so the question is, 2 years hence, will Obama want to be seen with